Welcome back to the Spirit, Mind and Soul podcast. Today I'm speaking with Cathy, who for many years was an academic neuroscientist. She now works as a breathwork facilitator. This big life change came after spending some time in the jungle at an ayahuasca camp, which she shares all about in this podcast episode. Cathy lives somewhat of a nomad lifestyle with her partner and baby son. This is a great journey of transformation. We talk about inner child, we talk about the meaning of anxiety, what that means for us when it's showing up. And overall, it's just an inspiring story and shows you that you can completely change your life. This was a really great episode for me as well because I'm really intrigued by plant medicines, ayahuasca in particular, so it was really great to hear her experience and journey. And I hope you enjoy it as well. Don't forget to hit the like button, and if you haven't already subscribed, you can do so now and you'll be notified when the next episode comes out soon. Thank you so much for agreeing to come on the Spirit, Mind and Soul podcast and share your story. Really, really interesting one. I can't wait to go deeper on and hear more about it. So we're going to be talking about obviously huge life changes. You were back in the day, you were a neuroscientist, an academic neuroscientist. You're now a breathwork coach. But there was a real transformation that went on there and how you went from one career to what you're doing now. So do you want to take us back to that? What was life like back then? What got you into what you were doing back then? What were you like as a person?
Yes, oh my gosh, there's so much happens in between, and it's quite interesting you say about, like, it's career change, but it's finding yourself in some ways than just kind of choosing a new career. It's such a fascinating, when you think you're doing one thing, you think, oh, I just want a different job, but then in the process you learn so much about yourself. So I did a degree in engineering. I ended up doing a PhD then in neuroscience, and my specialty was in brain imaging. So I would look at images of brains and try and understand what's happening in certain disorders. I studied epilepsy for a number of years and then moved into psychiatry. So I studied in labs all over the world, starting in Ireland, San Francisco, London, and I did that for about 8 years. Doing research on trying to understand what's happening in the brain in these conditions, and is there a way we can predict what's happening and how people can get better treatment and things like that. So it's a really fascinating area. And when I started, I was like, wow, that's so amazing. I'm quite logical minded. I quite enjoy, figuring things out. And I kind of thought that research would be a good fit for me. And it's quite interesting how we kind of think these things, and that is still true in a lot of regards. But I think, again, in the process of learning more about myself, I learned more about the things I enjoy and how it's not just one thing or another. And I think what's so important to say here is, what might fit us at one point in our lives often adapts and evolves. And also, I think a big part of this was your idea of what a particular career has in mind. And when I look back, and I don't think I was thinking this really solidly at the time, but, really big value for me in my life is freedom, like feeling free. And, an academic career felt like that for me. It felt like, whoa, I just researching and pondering and pontificating and discussions. It sounded, and I remember actually in my undergrad looking at the professors going, they've got a sweet life. And then, going down that track and, like a good, 8 years later, more, you start to go, okay, my idea of it actually hasn't actuated into what it was. So, but your mind is like, yeah, but I've spent all this time, I've spent all these years, all this energy, all this sweat and blood and sweat and tears. I have to keep going. And I think that's what was in my mind for many years, is like, well, I have to. And trying to force myself to continue something that really just wasn't really a fit anymore. I think I enjoyed it to a certain extent, but I'm someone who really enjoys change. I love challenge. And as much as an academic career sounded like a good fit for me, academia has changed. Like, I'm not like some gentleman scientist in the 1800s. Like, this is like, it's funding, it's competition, it's almost narrowing yourself so much as an academic scientist that I never really realized a lot of this stuff until I was deep in it. And again, that idea of, I have to. And I think that was the theme that came up for many years after that. Well, I have to do this. I should do this. But what do I actually want wasn't something I even knew how to consider at the time. It took me many years to start learning how that is such an important question. Just because you're good at something. And I was really good at my job, but I was overwhelmed all the time. I was stressed. I was overthinking. I was waking up in the morning going, oh, all the things I have to do. It's quite a lonely route, academia. You could be working on a project by yourself for 3 years. And yeah, there's people to talk to and supports, but not really. And that's just not how I like to work. I felt it quite lonely. I felt it quite isolating, quite depressing. I did some teaching, which I loved. I love to teach, and looking back, it's so easy to see these things, that it was the interaction with people and, the conversations, being able to help people. And that's kind of what I've brought through into where I am now. That, again, you don't plan a lot of this stuff. You just, at some stage, you start to follow the guide, follow your heart, follow your intuition. And I think there was a big chunk of time for me to learn how to do that, to get to where I am now. And I'm very much better at saying no these days. I can say no, I don't know why I don't want to do it, but I don't care, it doesn't feel right. As opposed to before, I'm like, well, I have to have a really solid reason to be able to say no. And I think I was living out of fear a lot at that time. And even the research I was doing probably wasn't really aligned with me. It was just what other people thought I should do. And I would just go, okay. There you go.
Like, I know for me, I wasn't very good at saying no back then either, and it was there was a bit of a people pleaser in me as well. Whereas like now it's just no, and that's a full stop. You do not need to give a reason. If it doesn't feel good for you, just don't do it. But what got you then from, coming out of that place? You had an opportunity to go to Costa Rica and work in an ayahuasca. So what was the gap in between from leaving that, I guess career, if you want to call it, leaving that behind and then going to the ayahuasca camp? Tell us about that.
Oh my gosh. I mean, there was many years in between these two things. Like, when I quit, I was at like a height of overwhelm, a height of just like not being happy in my life. And I think for many years I thought about leaving, but didn't know how or what I should do. And I thought, I just need to figure out what I'm going to do and then I'll leave. But that never happened. And I got to a height of my overwhelm where I'd moved to London. I was working in King's College. I was like, this is it. This is a really great center. I'm going to really thrive here. And I didn't. And I just, to be honest, I gave myself about a month and I said, I'm quitting next month. And I saved every penny I could in that month so I could afford rent. And I just quit. And then after that, there's many things I did. I started my own business. I was a digital director in an agency in London for a couple of years. And then I started another business. And I kept trying to find what it was I wanted to do. And I think when I look back now, it wasn't necessarily the academia that didn't fit me. It was all the other things about myself. It was the fact that I wasn't listening to myself. When I was working as a digital director in an agency, I had lots of clients that we had to build technical products for. And I got swept into that of the people pleasing as well. Like, well, I have to, and more clients. Well, I just have to stay on top of everything. And it wasn't the academic career. It was me not listening to myself. It was me not honoring what my needs were over my boss or the clients. It was just always everybody else first. And again, time and retrospect is really helpful to be able to see that. So I did a number of things, and then, but during that time, I did a lot of things. I did a lot of meditation. I did retreats. I did silent meditation retreat for 10 days, which really killed me. But I got a life coach who was very spiritual life coach who still, was a huge factor in my life. And I started this process of learning who I am at, I guess I was around 30, early 30s at that stage. And this life coach, who became a really good friend of mine, ended up working in Costa Rica for a while. She was just amazing. I really loved how she lived her life. She was just so, honest with herself and just did what she wanted, and was just so, wow, I don't think I had a lot of people in my life that just did whatever they want. And she would kind of fly all over the world and do things, and she happened to be in Costa Rica for a while. And that time I was working for myself. I decided what I wanted out of life was I wanted freedom. I realized that was so important to me, but what I was doing wasn't a factor at the time. So I started this company where I would help tech startups with, hiring their engineers. It was just things like I just really didn't care about, but I had freedom. I could do it from anywhere in the world except my own hours. So I went to visit my friend in Costa Rica, or I was planning to go visit her for a few weeks and just work from there. And before I went, she was like, she was working for this company. It was like a medical research kind of company that was based in Costa Rica. And she was like, well, they're looking for someone to do some project management stuff. Do you want to do it while you're here? And it was just one of those amazing things. I'm like, do I? Sure, I guess. And I moved to Costa Rica for about 9 months. Just on a whim, I think I decided, and I left like 2 weeks later. Like, my husband was my boyfriend at the time. We lived together. It all just kind of worked out. And I went again. I think I was just starting to listen to myself so much more. And I was like, I don't know why I'm doing this, but it feels like an opportunity. What was so interesting about this medical research company was based under the umbrella company that was also an ayahuasca center. And I knew this, but I was a little bit like apprehensive about ayahuasca. I'm like, I'm not sure that's really for me. I'd heard lots of crazy stories about it, but I think at the back of my mind, I knew I was gonna do it because I'm just such a curious person. But when I first got there, I had a new job, so I was just focusing on that. And what was interesting about the ayahuasca center, it's a place, if as a guest you have to go for 7 nights. You can't go for any less than that. You go for 7 nights. You do 4 nights of ayahuasca and 3 nights of breathwork. So it was interesting in the time before I did any ayahuasca, because I was just too scared and, not ready. I did a lot of breathwork, and this is a transformational breathwork that I hadn't experienced. I think I tried something similar one time just before I went, which was like, wow, what is this? And then I got really deep into the breath work. I was just so shocked at how insightful it was, how amazing it was for, connecting with this part of me that I wasn't listening to. So by the time I did the ayahuasca, I was really prepared. I think breathwork is a really good preparation for ayahuasca, and for people who think ayahuasca is too much or don't want to do that, I 100% respect that. It's quite intense. It's not that dissimilar. Like, you quieten the mind, you have these insightful experiences, you learn to listen to yourself. So yeah, I probably ended up doing about maybe 5 or 6 sessions of ayahuasca while I was there during that time. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And obviously, I mean, that's a process in itself. You got to that point where your curiosity got the better of you. You decided to take your first ayahuasca. So what was that? What was because I know that the plant medicine experiences, there's a lot of insight. There's a lot of stuff that shows up that maybe you don't want to see, but you kind of have to face. So what was that like for you? And what do you feel you learned about yourself and your, where you were going in life from your ayahuasca experience?
My first ayahuasca experience is probably the one that's most stereotypical, but also the easiest to explain. And I think anyone who's experienced with ayahuasca, some of it is explainable, and actually even trying to explain it kind of reduces it a bit. And there's some of the other experiences I've had that I don't know how to explain to you. Like, I've no idea. I was changed after it, but I'm still like, what was that? But what was interesting was the first experience I have was like, it's almost embarrassingly textbook, what I'll tell you about it. I used to have debilitating back pain, like really, really bad back pain. I broke my back twice when I was younger, once as a teenager, and then in my early 20s, like ridiculously freak accidents. So yeah, I had this terrible back pain, for years that would just come on and off, but I knew it was emotional. I knew it was psychological, because even though there may be kind of on an MRI scan, there might be some things that suggested there's some wear and tear, I would get my worst pain when I was under pressure. My back would go out when I was too stressed. My back would go out when I had too much on. My back would go out when I didn't have to say no. Like I knew that. And it's almost there's only enough journaling or talk therapy that was actually helping that. So sometimes you just know something's a problem, but I don't know how to stop it. I have a cold at the moment, and I know personally that I just have a lot on the moment and I've got a cold, but I don't think I can really stop that. I've got a toddler, but with the back pain, it felt different. It felt like, there's something at the root of this. I know there's a shift, just a fundamental thing I knew. So I went into that ayahuasca experience with that question, because you set an intention before you go and do your ayahuasca. And my intention was I wasn't to get rid of my back pain. I think I tried to get rid of my back pain for about 10 years, everything to try and get rid of it. And I went into the ayahuasca going, okay, I want to understand it. I want to understand, what am I not seeing? What am I not understanding? What have I never understood about this? Because I felt like I knew so much about it already, but it was still there. So what's the missing piece? And I had some really deep clarities that night. It was quite a crazy night. I mean, I felt like I was shown all of my fear, all of my past experiences of feeling unsafe. And what was very poignant was all the experiences where I felt unsafe that I, put myself in, that I wasn't listening to myself, and it was more important to fit in with the crowd, or it was more important to, do what was expected than to listen to myself. And like the textbook thing that I think is quite hilarious, but also was like, even when I realized during the ayahuasca, I was like, oh my God, this is kind of cringe. Like there was a moment of, I found there's this child, like it was my inner child, and there was literally a child, hiding on the other side of the room, and it was like this little feral, kind of dirty feral child that was like hiding. And it took me a while, and I realized, oh my gosh, that's my inner child. But it was, and this child didn't want to come near me; it was afraid of me. And I was like, oh God. And I think during it, I just felt so much compassion, and I felt so guilty that I had literally abandoned this child, because, the story that came out from it was, well, she doesn't trust you because you don't listen. You're not looking after her. You're not listening to what her needs are. You're just doing all the things you think you should do to please other people and please the society, whatever it might be. And what was really interesting that happened during it, when you take ayahuasca, we take the first cup at around 8:00 in the evening, and then off you go on your little journey. And then later on, they call for the second cup, so you can go up and take a second cup. And when that happened, and I could see everyone kind of going up, and I was lying on this, like you lie on a kind of mat or bed on the ground. And I was like, oh God, I better go. Everyone's queuing up. I better go. And I went to try and get up, and I was like, I can't. I was so out of it. Like I just couldn't. And then I was like, this is it. I got this really dense, clear insight into, this is why you're just doing things as everyone else is doing. You're not listening. Do you need this or do you want this? And I was like, I don't want another cup. I'm still like way in this experience. Mm-hmm. So I lay back down, and that's when everything changed. Like the experience changed so much. It became really light. I was like, yes, you're listening. Eventually this like little feral kid kind of came over to me. And the weird part was like, she kind of climbed back into my chest at one stage. And I was like, oh, don't make a sound. Just she's come home. But she was still really scared. So I didn't want to like move. And, after all, it sounds so crazy as I say it now. I haven't thought about this in a while. So, I was like, okay, and I was having an experience. Lots of other things were kind of coming up during it, but this little kid was kind of just sitting there, not ready to talk, not ready to do anything. She just kind of was sitting in my chest. And then at one stage, I got this kind of clarity of like, oh, well, maybe we want to go have a look around. And I had this thing that came to mind during this experience of I have to listen to my child. Like that, I just cannot continue on with my life the way I've been doing it. I had to make a promise to myself during it that I would listen. Now, look, this was 6-7 years ago at this stage, and I forget all the time. Like we always do, we're human. And I keep having to remind myself, and I go, hang on a second, when I'm getting stressed again, what am I doing? Am I listening to myself? Did my inner child want to do this? And once she started becoming a little bit more comfortable with that promise, she started becoming more playful. Like it was like, maybe we'll go for a walk outside. And I was like, do you want to go for a walk outside? And then we would go for a little walk outside. And like this inner child was starting to become more playful. And I think what was holding me back for so many years of my life was the not listening, but also a deep fear. Every time I went to do something, like life wasn't that fun. It was kind of scary and kind of fearful. And every time I wanted to make a decision to do something new, it was like, oh, like it was fraught with fear. And, this experience was really like, well, actually life can be fun and it can be playful, but you know what? All of me has to feel it. I can't my mind can't go off and do this thing without checking with my body, or it will be painful, it will be hard, it will be fearful, and I probably won't get the best experience out of it. So that's the experience that I had, that I went away with, of this, deep need to fully listen to all parts of myself. And as amazing as the ayahuasca was, and like I said, the other times I did it was probably even more intense and quite overwhelming emotionally as well. It's not something I want to go do all the time. I kind of parked that for the time being. I have a little kid now, and don't really feel the need or want to go off and take ayahuasca for a week. I think it will be in my future again, but for now, it's a case of just needing those tools to continue to listen to myself, and that was just the biggest understanding there, of just listen, stop, listen, quieten this mind. I was an academic scientist for so many years. Like I think, like I overthink, I analyze. That's just me. And I think a lot of these experiences with the breathwork and the ayahuasca, and I had some psilocybin experiences as well, has really taught me to learn who I am and be okay with that. This isn't about getting to a place where I'm perfect and I'm zen and I'm floating around life just in perfection. No, I can be an anxious mess. I overthink. I'm funny. I'm angry. I'm passionate. I'm frustrated. Like all of these things is who I am. And can I get more comfortable with that? Because when I started on this journey of self-discovery, like 12 years ago, probably at this stage, I think that's what I was wanting. I wanted to get to the stage where every decision I made would be perfect. Every interaction would be calm and present and aware. And it's kind of funny, as you go deeper into this experience, you're like, well, no, that's absolutely not what happens. But what happens is you get more comfortable with who you are and more okay with being a messy human. So I think I'm more okay with being a messy human, but I keep having to remind myself, and I think this is so important, because I think a lot of people who come to my classes as well, I see the same story all the time of just this expectation of themselves. But actually, can we just relax, listen, and, be okay with not being perfect, being okay with messing up? This is a life experience. It's not about getting to a perfect destination. And I think even when I experience pain, when I experience anxiety, which doesn't necessarily go away, it just changes a bit, because I know now I have tools to listen to myself. My anxiety, I've made more friends with it. Like, so if I'm feeling anxious, I'm like, hang on a second. Why am I feeling anxious today? There's something my body is trying to tell me.
Yeah.
Whereas I think with anxiety, most people experience, or what I would have experienced previously, oh no, I'm anxious, shit, stop it, take something, get rid of it. but making friends with who we are. And, it doesn't have to be shameful to feel anxious. Like, anxiety is really helpful. It's usually telling me that I'm doing something I don't want to do. And I have to stop and be brave enough to stop and go, this isn't working for me.
Mm-hmm. And I know you were in Costa Rica. It was almost a year. It was like, did you say it was
About
several?
9 months, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. And then obviously that's a big, transformational journey, even just being in a different country and learning more, I always like being away from your normal environment. You're disconnecting yourself from from everything, even like I spent 2 months in Texas in the summer, and just being out of my home, I felt very detached from my home. And
Mm.
and then being back here now, it's like, wow, I think taking
Mm-hmm.
yourself out of your normal environment detaches you from everything, and it shows you there's a different way of life. There's a different
Mm.
more. There's more.
Yeah, and I mean, it's quite interesting you say that, because I've experienced two versions of this, exactly what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
I would travel. I've lived in several countries over my life. I don't think I've ever stayed any one place for more than about 2 years since I was probably in my early 20s. And it used to be a little bit more of an escape thing. Like, I'm going to move to this country, I'm going to be a completely different person, and I'm going to do this and this. And, you can't escape who you are. And I think that's what I used to say. Moved to San Francisco for a few years by myself. I moved to London. And, when I moved to Costa Rica, it felt different. It felt different. It wasn't trying to change or be someone else. It was just more, I think all of it was guided. I think all of it was experiences I needed and to learn these lessons. And then we went to New York afterwards, and now we're here in Lisbon, and we'll move back to London shortly. Like, we're constantly moving, but definitely the experience in Costa Rica was so unique, because you're like I was living offsite from where the ayahuasca center was, but literally like 2 minutes down the road. I was like listening to people's ayahuasca experiences every day for this whole time I was there. It was just such a submersive experience. I'm so glad I had that experience. It was definitely takes you out of where you are, changes your perspective in the same way ayahuasca does. That's exactly what it does. That's what breathwork does. It changes your perspective. And actually, that's the beauty of these really intense tools. Even if you don't have the ability to move and you're in the same place, and you probably are going to be in the same place for a while, there's tools that can change your perspective without having to go anywhere, which is beautiful. And it's so lovely to have all those experiences. But I love now that when I move, like my anxieties, my tensions, all that stuff are just coming with me. But having these tools to really deeply change how I feel come with you everywhere you go.
And how did the breathwork come about? Then obviously you had your breathwork experience at the ayahuasca retreat. So did that plant the seeds of, this is something I want to explore, perhaps start my own business doing breath? Is that where that came from?
Yeah, oh my gosh, it was actually quite interesting, because as I had said, when I moved to Costa Rica, I had my own business, but it was nothing I really was passionate about in any way, except the fact that it gave me freedom. So I would often go into these breathwork sessions going, you always set an intention. It's really helpful to set an intention when you go into a session. And it was often, what should I do with my life? And I knew my contract in Costa Rica was temporary, and I had planned to move to New York with my husband anyway. But I didn't know what was next for me. And I was kind of continuing to do this job that I just wasn't getting a lot. It's hard to continue to do something that you're not passionate about. It was almost the same as the academia. Like, it was like, I can do it, but it's very difficult. So I never thought going into this, like, oh, I'll be a breathwork coach. Like, it just never even dawned on me, because my thinking mind would be like, no, you can't do that. You're a scientist. You're an engineer. Like, who are you to guide people to help find themselves? Like, it wouldn't have even crossed my mind as a possibility, even though I would look at the other people doing the teaching. I'd be like, oh, I'd love to do that. Whereas your critical mind comes in immediately. I'm like, well, you couldn't do that. Whereas I would often go into breathwork going, what should I do with my life? And I would get these insights and clarities when you quieten this judgmental mind that was like, do more breath work. And at the start, it was like, yeah, I'm going to do more breath work. It'll become more clear, because often when you go into breath work, and I know for me personally, when I first started breath work, I was just releasing tension and holding, and years of pain, years of have tos and shoulds. There was no clarity yet. And I think sometimes that you just got to do the clearing work before you get to the place where you can listen. So for me, the original message was just keep doing breath work. And I was like, okay, I'm going to keep doing breath work. And I would go into breath work every time I would go to lie down to do this transformational breath practice. I would just start crying, tears would just flow and flow and flow. And I think for, weeks and months, I was just letting go of all this holding on and tension, and all of that was just needing to be released so I could get to this place where I can hear. And then the message was still the same. The message was do breath work. And at one stage, it was like, do breath. Oh, I could do this. This is what I could do. And I'd have these, imaginings and visions during my breath work of me doing it and facilitating breath work. And I'm like, wow, it sounds so possible. And then I'd come out of the practice going, oh no, but that's too hard. How could I do that? I don't even know how I'd start to do it. And I would poo-poo it. But I would continue to the practice, and this would continue to come up. When I was about to move to New York, because I'd, met so many amazing breathwork practitioners in Costa Rica, and I was asking them, well, where will I do breathwork when I go to New York? And I was introduced to one person who introduced me to someone else, who introduced me to someone else. I just kept following these breadcrumbs until I was introduced to a guy called David Elliott, who's based in LA and New Mexico in the US. And as soon as I found David, I was just like, I love transformational breath work. It's a particular style. I love it. I still do it. It's amazing. But from a teaching perspective, I kind of knew, again, it's just this clarity, this insight I had that I wanted to learn from David. And I did. Over that year I was in New York. And I also said, I was saying to my husband at the time, I'm just going to do this course. I'm going to do these, there's a number of courses you have to do to become a practitioner, but I'll just do it and then we'll see later. But actually, while we're here, I'm just going to do this. So I kept just taking one step and one step and one step, until I started doing some facilitation in New York. And then when I moved back to Ireland, and it was just before the pandemic, I was doing some in-person classes in Dublin, which I was just really enjoying. I was still doing some of my other work, because it wasn't like I just decided I was going to be a breathwork practitioner. I kind of had this idea I would build up to that. And then when the pandemic hit, everything changed for me. Everything went online. I have a very technical background. I was able to just bam, 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 just set up a whole online platform. And, breathwork wasn't something a lot of people had heard of at this time back in 2020. So I just had so many people coming to the classes, online classes I was holding weekly at the time during lockdowns. And it just built from there, and to a stage where it was quite easy for me to switch and do it full time. So it was just, again, following breadcrumbs, not deciding what the end was, because if I decided too early, I'm going to be a breathwork practitioner, I'm going to have an online business, I'm going to build a platform, I wouldn't have done it, because I'm like, I don't know how do I start that? I don't even know what I would do. Yeah. Whereas if I just kept taking the next step and the next step and the next step, and because I enjoyed it so much, I was doing so much my own breathwork, every time I would go to breathe, do my own breathwork, I would have more clarities, more insights, more ideas, I get more excited. Like I would have big ideas during breathwork, like big ideas that I'd come out of the breathwork going, no, I couldn't do that. That's too big. But over time, it would just start to unfold. And I think when you get to a stage where you know how to connect, and I keep pointing to my chest, because for me, that's where it is, this heart space, that for me, I've had so many experiences where I connect with that quite easily now. And like every human, I forget and I go away and I'm like, oh, I'm too busy for breath work. And, suddenly I'm all in my head again. But I know now I have a way of connecting to that place. So when I'm off course or something feels hard and I'm pushing, I'm doing some breath work going, okay, don't be afraid to change. Don't be afraid to go in a different direction if it feels better to do that. So, which is still scary. It's still hard. But I think when you are more in touch with your intuition, it's easier to try. Whereas I think making change for me previously was always fraught with worry and anxiety, and I'd still do it, but it was just harder. It does feel easier now, but we flip in and out. I think that's just the nature of being a human.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. So that's, in those moments of breath work, and you have, because you're listening to your intuition or your soul, or your inner child, but then you come back out into the real world and it's all the outside noise, and that's what's scary, and that's what distracts us, and that's what gives us the anxiety, because then you can fall out of alignment. But yeah, I think it's good to, and I think meditation, breath work, I don't know, you're obviously the expert here, but I always think there's no rules. If I don't have half an hour to go and do like a proper, but there's always different ways that you can do it, and just take that time for yourself if you are feeling the anxiety or feeling the fear of something. I think even just 5 minutes just focusing on your breath and brings you back to yourself.
Absolutely. And I think before I listened to myself more, I think I kept having this idea of how things should be. So, okay, when I'm a breathwork coach, I'm going to have to get up at 6 o'clock every morning. I'm going to have a practice. I'm going to, practice what I preach, thinking it had to be a certain way. And I guess I think I've just got more comfortable with who I am, that I'm just like, that's such bullshit. Like, yeah, that's great for someone. Doesn't mean it's great for me. I hate mornings. I'm not a morning person. I don't get up and do breath work in the morning. I wake up to my child shouting for me, and the day just starts, and breakfast and blah, blah. I don't have the luxury of doing that, or I don't think I want it either, but I'll find a place in my day to do that. And what's really interesting about breath work, active breath work practices, as opposed to like slow breathing practices, is a lot of the research is very clear that an active breath work practice like transformational breath work, Wim Hof, any of those things, they don't need to be done every day. I don't do them every day. And actually, a lot of the research on these kind of transformational breathwork practices is based on one session a week over the course of like 6 to 8 weeks, and the transformational effects that can have. And that suits someone like me. It really does. I'm not going to be able to do practice when I have a little toddler who is like an absolute maniac. Another time of my life, maybe I will. I do try and do some slow breathing practices in the evening if I'm just winding down or reading my book, but I'm less beating myself up if I don't get to do that every day. But I know now I have a practice that I can do. Or sometimes with active breath work, you can do it, it's seasonal. You might have a period of your life you feel like you need it, and you can join a course, or you can do something with someone and go deep into what's stuck for you in the moment, what's hard for you, what you want to move through, and then park it for a while and come back. Like, I love that that's possible.
Yeah, that's refreshing to hear you say that, because I'm the same, and I like to turn to, I think, guided, breath work with someone like yourself who talk you through it, and it almost feels like you still need to do the work, but it's like you've got support there and encouragement there, and then I'll maybe do that when I feel I need it, or maybe try and get into the habit of once a week or whatever. But I really do like, just sometimes I just need 5 minutes to just focus on my breath, just for me, not with anyone else, just because I need it. So it's nice that you
Exactly. And
that,
that's all, listening to yourself. It's like, well, what do I need? Or as opposed to what someone tells me I should do. Oh, someone said on a podcast that I should be doing this every day, and I haven't done it in a week. Like, what do you want? What do you need? And like, even me, I've been a breathwork practitioner for many years now, and I'll go so much deeper when I go join someone else's class or do a friend of mine's class or course. When I first had Teo, my son is 18 months now, but the first few months were hard. Like, I mean hard. I was not prepared. I was unexpected. Like, I'm sure most parents have experienced. Like, I was just like, what is this life I've suddenly in? It was so emotionally charged that doing breath work was almost impossible for me to do it properly, to go deep in it in any way. I think it was just that survival instinct at the time. And this is after me being years of doing this kind of work. I was just in survival mode for many months, and that was okay, because it's sometimes in our lives that's just what we need. I was trying to do a little slow breathing while I was feeding the baby, something like that, just because I knew that was going to be helpful and grounding. But what happened then was about 6 months in, when the baby was about 6 months, I got a kind of a hit being like, okay, now I need to go. And I actually booked a session with one of my teachers, David, who I did my original training with, just because I know it just felt right. I was like, okay, I need to do a session with David. I did one session with David, and it's like 6 months of overwhelm, 6 months of tears just flooded out of my body in that like 30-minute session. I'm like, that's what I needed at that time. And then I just moved on with my life. And, I've done breathwork sessions with other people since. And again, when I need them, and I don't have time at the moment to book into some lovely retreat or course at the moment, but I know they're there for me when I do need them and it feels right.
Mm-hmm. And how can people get in touch with you to come and work if they want to come and join one of your breathwork sessions?
Yes, absolutely. So on Instagram, I'm Breathwork Coaching. My website is breathworkcoaching.com. I do run some drop-in classes, but a lot of what I deliver is in my membership plan. Like what I'm really passionate about breathwork being for deep transformation. And I used to run just like these drop-in classes you could come to kind of once a week, but I realized that for deep transformation, I want to take people on a journey. And so the center and the focus of that is the courses I run. So I run a 6-week breathwork immersive program. Actually, the next one's in January. I think kind of early to mid-January it'll start. It'll be run for 6 weeks. And that's the process where you'll learn really deeply what breathwork can be for you. And I think sometimes we can get a lot out of one session, but actually over the 6 weeks, we can absolutely see change. And I base this as well on the research on these practices of actually 6 weeks is probably what we need minimum to see some big shifts in our life, as opposed to just having this, psychedelic experience and then, having a few cries and then going off into our life will probably still feel quite similar. So the 6-week program will hopefully give people a really deep insight into the power of your own breath.
Amazing. I'll leave the link for that below then if anyone wants to come and check that out. I do recommend that they do. And what about for you, Cathy? Is there anything outside of work? I know that you're in Portugal just now.
Yes.
Is that right? Yeah, and you are planning on going back to. When we spoke, you said you can't decide. You've got so many Ireland, London. It's nice to have all. So what is the plan for you? Is there something that you're longing for that's just for you in the future?
Well, it's interesting you say that, because I'm always someone who's always like craving the next thing and excitement. And what, my breath work has taught me over the last, year is, as much as part of me just wants this growth and next and expansion, and I'm doing expansion on my business, but it has to be slow, because the message I keep getting when I connect to that part of myself, that inner child, that small part of me, is like, be a mom. Like I'm, a mom to a really active little boy, and he needs to be front and center, and I need to balance that, because from a business perspective, I'm so passionate about what I do. It's really hard for me to stop myself trying to do everything. And I'm not someone who's ever wanted to do everything. I want to have flow and balance in my life. And I have to every time my to-do list gets too much, I have to stop and breathe and listen to that part of myself as what's important. And it was like, well, have space and energy. When I give myself space and not working all the time, and just space with my son, but space by myself. And it's really hard to work, have time for your kids, and have space for yourself. Like, I don't know how anybody does that. Like, I really don't understand how that's possible. Because my best ideas, my most creative space is from quiet and slowness and flow. And that's so hard to find with an 18-month-old. Like, it's insane. So I'm in a transition period, I think, of listening, of deep listening and deep rest when I can get it, because life is too hectic. Like, this kid's up at 5 a.m. and he's going to bed at 8 p.m. Like, I don't have time for anything. And I think I get my inspiration in these small places. And I think there is no big plans at the moment. There is expansion of my business in terms of how it's growing, but I need to park these big ideas for now, because every time I listen, as much as I don't want it, like, I want to go, okay, this big thing. And it's like, no, quiet, go back into yourself. It's a transition phase. And I think the next big thing is coming, but I need to patience, I think, for me at the moment, which is so frustrating, because all I want to do is build and do fun, big things. So it will come in its own time.
Yeah. So like you said at the start there, just being a mum, that's,
That's enough. And it's hard for someone who's like an overachiever to accept. And I think that's why the breath work is so helpful, because I need that reminder that that's enough. I need to remind myself, how important these years are, and to be present with that. So if I didn't have the breath work, I'd find that harder. I mean, I find it hard anyway. Being a mom is really hard. But without the breath work, I think it would be more difficult to stay in that space with presence.
Yeah. I hope you enjoyed listening to Cathy's story. All details on how to contact Cathy are in the description below. She is also starting a new membership, so for anyone that's been thinking about breathwork or curious about starting breathwork sessions, the details for that are in the link below as well. If you enjoyed this episode, please hit that like button and subscribe, and you'll be notified when the next episode is out soon. There's some really great guests coming up for you.